Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Naruto Fell in Love with Zero Two. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. I will drown you in crimson. Two monsters. Puma. Back then, that question never even crossed my mind. Yes, I was trapped in that room for as far back as I can remember. It felt like I had even older memories, but I soon forgot them. I didn't know who took care of me either. Probably a stand-in for what you'd call a mother. I can't remember who she was, or even what she looked like. One day, for the first and only time, that someone brought me something that wasn't food. I remember. It tasted horrible. It was a picture book. As I turned the pages, its bright colors jumped out at me, as did various shapes. It had words too, but I couldn't understand them. And after that day, she never showed up again. Anyway, this book was my first pretty thing. The outside world surely had many more. That's what I innocently believed in that moment. It turns out that I was half right and half wrong. Scene break. Thud. She jumped when they threw the boy into her room. Jerked from her slumber by the harsh sound, the little Oni scrambled upright with a shriek, flinging herself against the wall as far as her chains would possibly allow. The interlocking links rattled harshly at her legs, jerking her backward with a start. She half expected someone to grab her and drag her outside, to haul her away from more experiments. More shocks. More pain. Instead, a corpse landed at her feet with a harsh crunch. Distantly, she heard a strange alien voice bark at her. One she couldn't understand in the least. She'd never been so grateful for that. Stay put, freak. She knew at once he was dead, because he wasn't breathing, because his neck was facing in the opposite direction, because he wasn't moving. Yes, he had to be dead. There was no other explanation. He lay there at her feet, his blue eyes listless and vacant, his straw gold hair matted against his forehead, face frozen in surprise, mouth open in a round O. She knew at once without checking that he didn't have a pulse. He was dead, dead as can be. He was even missing an arm. She knew he was dead, her small mind. And yet, large, emerald eyes observed the man at the door for a long moment, glowering at his masked face. She continued to glower at him, watching, waiting, until the door finally slammed and silence consumed the room once more. She scowled, her thin lips forming an angry line. She hated him, just as she hated this place. All of them. Everything. She wanted to tear him apart, rend him limb from. But she didn't have the strength, and her feeble efforts only earned her more pain and punishment. Punishment meant needles and shocks, not sleeping, endless agony. Yes, she couldn't and he knew it and she hated them for that, hated these things for what they were doing to her. As ever, the chains prevented her from rushing the door. The boy was dead. Twitch. Curious, her sorrowed gaze, those bright eyes, fell back to the boy. They remained upon him, examining him for what felt like the longest time. Questions bounded around in her mind, bouncing off the walls like small rubber balls. What was he? Why was he here? Was he like her? Did they expect her to eat him? She didn't want to. He smelled funny. After another solemn moment, they dropped to stare into her lap. What was the point of throwing a corpse in here, she wondered. More importantly, why was it starting to move? Then it came back to life. Oh, that gave me such a crick in the neck. She yelped and instinctively ducked her head as the body started shouting. Because now it really was moving. With a scream that would have made the devil himself run for the hills, the boy lurched up, grabbed his neck, and wrenched it back around. Bones popped, muscles stretched, his wounds slithering shut. The severed stump of his arm twitched, sprouting bone then muscle then flesh before her very eyes, leaving him looking at her in quiet disbelief. A beat of silence passed. Then another. And another still. Wow, he muttered softly, rubbing his neck, patting at his bloody orange shirt and dark pants. Damn it, that really hurt. Databeos, what I get for trying to escape. Then he saw her. A smile flashed out like sunshine. Hello. She watched him for a long moment, considering. She'd seen strange things here before. But this? Ah, she rasped. When he didn't immediately respond, her bright eyes gazed into his silent profile, her stoic expression peeking into a curious expression. He felt pure. She couldn't think of another way to explain it. There was no other word for it. His mind was simple and clean, and she didn't feel any of the fear she felt from the others. There was something else there too, but she remained hesitant, reluctant to approach this strange new guest in what had been her room for as long as she could remember. He regarded her curiously and she him, and for a moment there was silence until the boy spoke again. "Who are you?" She growled at him. "Who, me? I'm Naruto." More of that sunbeam smile, his fists proudly planting on his hips. "Uzumaki Naruto you?" The whiskered cheeks drew down in a slight pout. "I get the feeling you don't understand me, you know." She bared her teeth at him in what she hoped was a menacing gesture. Grah. It did not have the effect she intended. "Hey, what's this?" Spying her storybook at her side, he reached for its worn cover. "Looks like a book or?" Bright eyes cut to him in a panic. Instinct overtook the horned one all at once. Flailing, she clawed at him, trying to snatch the book away. No, that was hers. No one else could touch it. Unfortunately, he proved far more nimble than her and easily evaded her clumsy attempts to reclaim her prize, unbound by chains as he was. Frightened out of her little mind, she did the only thing she could think of. He recoiled with a start. "Ow, what the hell? Why'd you bite me?" His startled yelp came out of nowhere, catching her off guard, and she retreated, clutching the book to her chest and bracing herself for a blow. The others always hit her when she bit them. She expected this to be no different. But no pain came. No blow to the head followed, nor did she find herself crushed to the floor by angry men shouting strange things she didn't understand. In truth, it left her at a loss. Flatfoot, she stared at him in abject confusion. While she couldn't communicate with him, she could read the hesitation in his aura, a wariness. Why am I alive?" The boy tilted his restored neck aside, utterly misinterpreting her in his ignorance. "Dunno. Just am, I guess. Sowie's been like that, I guess. I die and then I come back a little later." His smile seemed a little forced to her in that instant, frail, even. Fragile. "What about you? What's your story?" "Aoi." A beat of silence passed between them. "You really can't understand me, can ya?" he deadpanned. Baffled by his seemingly endless optimism, the little Oni growled. She stared at him, taking in his every feature. Like her, he was clad in little more than rags, though his orange-blue jumpsuit admittedly looked to have seen better days. What were those? Why were they so bright? They were almost pretty even. It made her curious. Yet that curiosity was shadowed by fear. Fear of him. Of the unknown. Of everything, really. For someone with so little contact of the outside world, he was an anomaly for her, a conundrum that she didn't truly understand. Was this a trick? Something meant to make her lower her guard? She didn't know. Didn't understand. And what she didn't understand she feared. As such, she nearly bit him again when he inexplicably grabbed her ankle. If she'd felt panic before then, this was true terror. Her mind revolted, bleeding loudly. "Let go of me." She didn't like being touched. Touching meant pain. Pain meant experiments. Agonish. Why wasn't there pain? There should have been pain. By now. Flinching, the little Oni dared to open her eyes. 002, as she looked on, the blonde lifted her ankle slightly, examining the bracelet there with almost childlike curiosity. "What's this? Some kind of number? A code? No 02? Gay, I never was very good at reading before they nabbed me." The little Oni frowned at him. "Yota? A name?" He'd given her a name? She'd never had a name before, had she? If she'd possessed one, she couldn't recall. That memory had been lost long ago, swallowed by her captivity. But why had he given her a name? It made no sense, yet some small part, an increasingly large one, seized at it as though she were drowning. For one who'd seldom known happiness of any sort, she'd gladly grasp at whatever she could find. The syllables tasted strange and foreign on a tongue not meant for human speech, but she forced them out in spite of her struggles, weakly, faltering in her ignorance. 02. Oh, she speaks. Blue eyes burned with excitement as he scooted closer to her. Can you understand names? Do you know where we are? Yo? He squinted at her. I'm not sure if you're messing with me. Excited, one of her hands grasped his, shaking his arm in clumsy delight. Was this what joy felt like? Surely it must be. Unbidden, an image from the picture book conjured itself in her mind, though she didn't understand it, not truly. Not yet. A startled squawk leaped from his lips as she rattled him to and from with all her considerable strength. Naruto, for his part, found himself all but powerless to resist, and was thrashed to and fro like a rag doll. All the while, she shouted the name he'd given her. Oh, ow my ears, geez, all right, let me go. Tears surfaced, and she frantically scrubbed at them with her sleeve. Hey, don't cry, what ya sorry about? He muttered, glancing aside. You're happy, I get it. Silence hung over them like a wet blanket, cloying and heavy. At last, Naruto spoke into it. Wanna be my friend? Zero Two bristled in disbelief. Why was he extending his hand to her? And why, for that matter, did she suddenly want to take it? Was it a human gesture? Did it mean something important? Surely it must. After all, he'd just given her what no one else had. Something she'd never known. A name. 02, sad, lonely, misunderstood little monster than she was, dared a smile and accepted his hand. Boy, they were each of them children. Little wisps in the way of life, monsters shunned by all. At present, they lacked the strength and power to rebel against those who held them down. But that would change. For now, they had no place in life, no holding in society. They were, in a word, outcasts and nothing more. Rejects. Fodder and fuel used for the sake of the advancement and survival of the human race. No one paid them any mind, nor any heed. This too would change one day. A monster, and a boy born to contain something far, far worse than a monster. But could not a monster befriend another monster? Couldn't they? Couldn't they coexist? Couldn't monsters fall in love? Looking back, 02 realized it was this moment that changed everything. Poor kids. Talking about proving themselves to papas they don't even know the truth. So, what's it matter, darling? They're all going to die sooner or later, anyway. Oi, that may be so, but there's no need to rub it in their faces, you know. Betcha 2 kisses they're gossiping behind our backs right now. You're on. Wanna eavesdrop? Good idea. Shouldn't talk about the new squad leaders like that. But I heard the 2 of them are monsters. What makes you say such a thing? Just look at their eyes. They're not human. That's creepy. So, what of it? The 02 and 09. A taste of hope. 02. He gave me that name. It was a strange name, but I liked it. He taught me words after that, how to speak, to talk. After that came letters and symbols, followed by learning to read. Others attempted teaching me after that. Communicating. Well, they tried. There were other words like pistol, stamen, Klaxosaur, plantation, but I didn't like them. I ignored them because I was able to read my storybook thanks to the one simple act of kindness. That pretty thing taught me more than I'd ever dreamed, but most importantly, it gave me my favorite word. Darling. I finally decided, then made my decision. Naruto. He was my darling. My prince, like in the storybook. My shining ray of hope. The others could talk to him, even befriend him, but they could never know him the way I did, not really. We understood each other. The others didn't. I was determined to keep that from happening at all costs. He didn't need anyone else. No, just the thought of him losing him to another girl, or worse, a human girl, terrified me beyond words. So I did the one thing I could think to do. I clung to him. I refused to speak to anyone but him. He could be loud, goofy, a bit of an idiot at times, but he was mine. No one else could have him. I'd kill anyone who tried. Because he was mine. Then we did something stupid. We tried to escape. Just the 2 of us, together. We were just children. What could we do? Weak, powerless children, without the slightest clue. Even so, we were still naive enough to make an attempt. For all our foolishness, we made it pretty far before they caught us. I'm pretty sure the old geezers tried to do something to our memories after that. Or maybe because of it. Regardless, the procedure didn't tack at least, probably not in the way they'd intended. On either of us. It was worse for my darling. Much worse. Whatever they did unlocked something deep inside of him. Something so awful and terrible that they never tried to tamper with either of our memories ever again. I didn't know what he did to terrify them that badly. The guard just screamed and threw him back in my room. He was covered in blood. Blood that wasn't his. His right eye turned red after that. Crimson and slitted. Like some kind of animal. It never changed back. I'd be lying if I said I didn't like it. Scarlet. Like me. Like my horns. I thought it was pretty. I realized something that day. My darling was a monster, like me. But the humans had hurt him terribly. On that day, I truly loathed them more than I'd thought possible. Why would they do such a thing to my darling? The one who gave me a name, a purpose, a reason to live? And they wanted me to forget him? To act like he never existed? No, he's my darling. I couldn't bear the thought of it. But for some reason, he didn't hate them. He just patted my head and said, "You're Zero Two, right? How could I forget something that important?" As expected of my darling. Even though we're both monsters. Even though those humans had hurt him. I wanted to become human. Like him. For him. It was vain of me to think so, but I needed it. I wanted darling to see me, to look at me. Me and only me. No one else. I couldn't stand the thought of it. My blood boiled whenever he told me about that one near him, clinging to him. So she'd lost someone. I didn't care. How could I care? I never saw her face. The only image I had of her was a vague one, given to me by my darling. It made me hate her all the more, because it wasn't fair. I was trapped in that room, the same room they often took him out of. My world was confined to 4 walls, a roof, and the ceiling and him. When I did leave it, it was for tests, always those god-awful tests. But my darling was always there. He never left me. It didn't matter how many times they separated us. We always found each other. I'm not sure who was the more stubborn. Eventually they gave up and let us be. I didn't care. I was just glad they finally stopped. I wanted to stand by his side forever. I wanted to make him mine. In a sense, I succeeded. In becoming human. Albeit partially. For a time. But darling was strange. He didn't seem to care that he was human. No, if anything he seemed determined to throw that humanity away entirely. After our failed escape attempt he still smiled, still taught me my words and letters. But something had changed in him. Hardened. I didn't know what until it was too late. By then it didn't matter. Could I have done something? Should I have? Would it have changed anything? I didn't know. If anything, it made me kinda happy. He trusted me more. Talked to me more. So what if it was at the expense of everyone else? He didn't need them. Then things changed again, this time through no fault of our own. When he came. When SHE tried to interfere. When the beast reared its head. Scene break. Naruto whistled. "So this is a Frankxx?" Zero Two almost shared his sentiment. His expression seemed fixed, almost hungry even. The Oni wondered what her own must have looked like. She imagined she wore a similar expression, one bordering on euphoria. Curious steps spurred her darling forward, sent him circling around it and the hanger. Slow strides carried him to its legs, followed by its ankles. Wild eyes of crimson and cerulean gazed up at the towering automaton before them with reckless abandon. Boyish exuberance burned in his gaze. Indeed, he looked all of an instant from surmounting the ladder and climbing all over the Frankxx before a guard finally attempted to stop him in his tracks. Attempted. The blonde simply leaped over him with a laugh, clearing several feet and his attempted captor in a single bound to alight on the robot's head. "Geez, this thing is huge," she called down at her. "And we get to pilot this? Best day ever. Zero Two, get up here." "Assuming you can pilot it," a harsh, flinty voice interjected. Zero Two nearly hissed. Though the newcomer had the appearance of an older man, she doubted he was one. No human could be so foul. Despite his shorting gray hair and a mustache, this man was far crueler than his age suggested. Half of his face lay hidden behind a mechanical mask of some sort, or maybe that truly was his face, and he leaned heavily upon a cane. As ever, his white was pristine and pressed, his white gloves immaculate and unstained. A lone horn jutted from the mechanical side of his face, hinting at his less-thanable origins. Despite all this, his lone organic eye somehow managed to convey a smile. Her name is Strelizia. Ignorant of her anger, Dr. Frankxx turned his horrible visage upward, regarding the rigid blonde perched atop the Frankx's head. I do hope the two of you appreciate the hard work you've put me through. It wasn't easy to bring this here. Shoulda known there'd be a catch. 3 short leaps brought Naruto to Zero Two's side. Not in front of her or behind her, but beside her. His hand found hers and squeezed, pale fingers interlocking with tan. Those mismatching eyes rounded on the doctor. Together, they presented a united front. She knew he hadn't forgotten him, neither of them had. How could they? He tried to take their memories. To expunge all their time together, discarding it as little more than noise to be erased. No amount of years or favors would be enough to blunt that anger, even if the geezer had brought this mech to the garden solely for them. Perhaps it was just another ploy to separate the two of them again. Perhaps not. Who could say when the doctor was involved? Whatever the case, there could be no escaping the old man. Not truly. After all, he designed the very Frankxx they were to pilot, just for him. The damned things were even named after him. What an ego. You're seriously going to let us pilot this, Frankxx? In the end, Naruto voiced her sentiment before she could. Slitted eyes regarded the doctor with wary suspicion. We might use it to crush you, you know. There it was again. That light, lilting note in his words that suggested all was well and good, when in truth, it didn't match his eyes. She couldn't tell if he was joking or not. Sometimes her darling could be hard to read. This was one of those times. There was a strangely feral glint in his eyes, despite the pleasant smile. Like a fox about to attack a much larger predator. In the end, the doctor didn't rise to the bait. Huh? A metallic laugh burst out of the man's helm, harsh and hollow. If that were the case, I would have died a long time ago. Be that as it may, I've brought a backup just in case the girl fails. Zero Two felt herself twitch. Naruto blinked. Backup? Distant footsteps echoed in the makeshift hangar. Senpai. Naruto tilted his head to regard the newcomer. Ichigo? She knew. Zero Two knew at once. This was the one he'd spoken of. Unlike them, this one was clad in a white robe beneath her winter coat, suggesting she'd just come from the lab before being brought here. Of her own will, perhaps? Or had she been dragged in against her will? Zero Two didn't care. Rather, she couldn't bring herself to care. Green eyes the color of poisoned honey shone within a face framed by ocean blue hair. She was young, younger than them both by perhaps a year or more, but even so, her stride didn't falter. If anything, she seemed almost heartened by the sight of them, the sight of Naruto. It was her. Despite never having laid eyes on her before, not even once, she knew. Saw it in the way this one looked at her darling. Something in her gut twisted horribly at the sight. A vicious snake of horrid dread knotting inwards on itself in endless loops. This one was a threat. A challenger. Someone who would happily tear down everything she'd ever known, all for her own selfish desires. She wanted to kill her. Wrap hands around her throat and squeeze, squeeze, squeeze until those awful eyes went glassy. She couldn't stand that look. No, the very sight of it made her. Perhaps sensing her distress, her darling released her hand and approached the newcomer. Ichigo, what are you doing here? The older boy frowned down at her. You're not ready for something like this yet? For a moment she almost thought those words would shatter the brunette. Somehow, she rallied through and shook her head. The doctor thinks I am. Her thin, reedy voice rose in disagreement despite the blonde's disapproving expression. If I can be of use to you. No. This time, the girl did flinch. And no, you're nowhere near ready to pilot a Frankxx with me. Or anyone, for that matter. Zero Two understood now. He was trying to be kind. To spare the girl pain. Go back, Ichigo. Dismissing her bravery, Naruto turned and flicked her forehead gently, pushing 2 fingers against her brow. Turning his back on the stricken girl, He made as if to leave her behind, only to pause instead. I'm sorry about what happened to Hiro, but I'm not the one for you to depend on. Just go back to the garden and forget about all this. About me. Sometimes, he really could be too kind for his own good. Her hand shot out, snagging him by the sleeve. Can't you see she's killing you? Naruto went rigid. What? The girl turned those wide, pleading eyes on him, gripping his arm for all she was worth. Zero Two's a monster. I overheard the guards talking. You can't trust her. Zero Two watched her darling twitch. A hand rose, palming his face. I tried to be nice, but you're so damn annoying. Ichigo froze. What did you just say? White teeth flashed in a rictus of a scowl. I won't say it again. Let go of my arm. Now, listen to me. I've heard about her. She's using you. She's a mon. Crunch. Zero Two watched the scene between them with intent, one leg's kicking absently against Strelizia's heel. As such, she had a prime view of her darling and his eyes as both snapped red. She hummed softly to herself as the boy turned to face the younger girl, eyes narrowed to indignant ruby slits. Without warning, his hand cracked out, striking Ichigo across the face and flinging her to the floor. A single backhand. Nothing more. Nothing less. That strike alone left a vicious red handprint against the girl's face. She suspected Naruto would have done much more if he hadn't restrained himself from lashing out. Annoying, 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 the words tore out of him on a roar. Why don't you understand? His shadow seemed to loom over Ichigo, as if it would swallow her whole. A hand snaked out in a flash, seized her by the collar. Yeah, she's a monster, he growled, revealing sharpened canine teeth as her jerked a thumb over his shoulder. A beautiful monster. Guess that makes me one too for choosing her. Neither of us are human, and I have absolutely no pity for anyone who tries to take her from me. Feebly, her hands clawed at his wrist. Senpai, you're hurting me. Naruto shouted over her. Yes, I am, he leered, exposing sharpened teeth. Perhaps you should speak more softly to me, Ishigaken. These days, the enemies of these monsters are dropping like flies. Wordlessly, he released his hold on her collar and dropped her to the floor. Get out of my sight. But I... Go. The guards didn't have to be told twice. After witnessing that display, it took little more than a nod from Dr. Frankxx to spur them into action. Within moments they took the shattered girl by her arms and ushered her away, heedless of her emotions. Naruto didn't move. Not an inch. He stood there in stoic silence, maintaining his bitter vigil, until her sobs finally faded into the distance. Only then did he turn to face the one responsible for engineering this sordid scene. Zero Two found herself somewhat startled to see both his eyes had gone red. Satisfied? Did you have to scare her that badly? The doctor posited, tilting his head. That was cruel. You may have just crippled any chance of her ever becoming a parasite. Was your hatred for her that severe? Again came that eerie blank look, that impossible expression of his. I didn't hate her. How could I hate her? But Naruto covered his eyes with a clawed hand. Was that a tear she saw just now? Trailing down his whiskers? No, that was impossible. It was necessary. So it had been a trap then. One last ploy by the doctor to separate the two of them. The thought made Zero Two bite her thumb. Why did she feel so anxious, then? It all worked out in the end. Her darling hadn't faltered, no, not in the least. He was still here. Still by her side. He hadn't betrayed her. He never would. He had unanimously rejected someone for her. So why did she feel so uneasy? Very well, then Dr. Frankx's cane struck the ground sharply, nearly causing her to flinch. I suppose I can accept that. Naruto's smile was pure as sunshine. His words, however, were anything but, I'm going to kill you someday, old man. For his part, Dr. Frankxx seemed utterly unfazed. If anything, she seemed almost amused by the boy's threat. If such a time comes, then I'll gladly accept my death at your hands. Then. Gesturing grandly to Strelizia's prone form, the good doctor stepped aside for the two of them. Shall we begin? Strelizia was ours. Ours alone. When we got older, and they tried to take the Frankxx from us, I refused to ride with anyone but my darling. I killed whomever they tried to make my partner. It's not like I went out of my way to do it. In the end, they just couldn't keep up with me. They were awful people, anyway. Perhaps it was childish of me, but it worked. The humans realized the only way to keep Strelizia active was to have the two of us pilot. If they didn't, they'd just waste more manpower. Again, I didn't care why they made the decision, only that they did. The bitch got the message, or so I hoped. Yes, my darling chose me over her. And I got to keep him. When we finally got to ride Togator, even now I can't properly put it into words. Exhilarating? Terrifying? Like dropping off a cliff and plunging into warm water. Falling, yet knowing someone will catch you. My memory's a little fuzzy when I think back on our very first ride together, but I do remember one thing. It felt right. Like two halves coming together. I saw his mind and he saw mine. I think I saw more than I was supposed to. That might be why my memory of that day isn't quite right. That's why I love him. He's a monster. Just like me. The only difference is he's from another world. My darling isn't normal. Then again, neither am I. That day only solidified my resolve. I decided that day, I'd do anything for him. I'd kill monsters. Become human. I would be his lance. And then kill those awful humans who hurt him. I would burn the world to ash if he asked me. Nothing would shake my resolve. I made up my mind. After seeing all the world had to offer and experiencing all its pleasures, I'd destroy it. Or spare it if my darling asked me to. For his sake. If he wanted to find his home, I'd take him there in heartbeat if I could. And if that world rejected him too, I'd destroy it apart of 82 pieces. And then, one way or another, some way, somehow, we would be free. Back then, we did realize until much later how easy we had it. Until the world came down on us years later. Until we visited that damn plantation. Scene break. Darling, I'm bored. When are we gonna land? A low rumble of laughter started in Naruto's chest, crawled up his throat, and trickled out his mouth. Other than that, he gave no reaction to her complaints. Meaning, he kept his nose stuck in that damn book? Unsatisfied by her partner's muted reaction, Zero Two puffed out her cheeks in annoyance. If she had to find one flaw with her partner, it was this. Sometimes he got entirely too focused on the wrong thing. That novel, for instance. It bore a strange orange cover with the words Aika Aika emblazoned on the front, and she had no idea where he'd gotten it. Likely he'd swiped it from an adult. More importantly, it was distracting him. Well, she had ways to remedy that. Shifting her weight on the seat opposite him and careful not to poke him with her horns, Zero Two propped herself up against his back. This elicited little more than a soft grunt from the blonde. Well, that simply wouldn't do now, would it? Draping both arms over her partner's broad shoulders, she pulled him closer, the better to nuzzle into his neck. When this still didn't produce the desired reaction, the hybrid growled and deliberately laid her mouth against the side of his throat, close enough to kiss him. Poised to carry out her brilliant plan, she spared him one final glance. Still no sign he'd taken notice of her. Too bad. An impish smile curled her lips upward. If you're going to ignore me. Timing it just so, she nipped him precisely as he began to turn to the next page. You'd better prepare for the consequences. The blonde jerked beneath her unexpected affection, his body spasming in a single, massive shudder. Much like a bucking bronco, she thought to herself. Suddenly, he rounded on her, swinging about in her arms until they sat face to face. She found herself face to face with a pair of brilliant, mismatching eyes. Blue and crimson glared back at her in mild disbelief and admonishment. Somehow, the sight made Zero Two grin all the more. She loved surprising him. No, she told a lie. She just loved her darling. All of him. Every single aspect. Catching Naruto by surprise was merely a benuso. Oops. Belatedly, she realized she'd accidentally drawn blood by biting him. Such a minor wound meant nothing to Naruto, of course. It would heal in a few minutes thanks to the unique properties of his body. Still, the realization that she'd injured him almost made her sheepish. Almost. Still, if the years had given her anything, it was confidence, not cowardice. He was playing with her horns again. Despite her best attempts to muster up a response, words abandoned Zero Two and she slumped. The twin tips had always been sensitive, and today his fingers were no less nimble, dancing over the red points with practiced precision. "Ah, darling," she hissed out a startled breath, her knees quivering as she nearly melted on the spot. "That's no fair, you have to warn me before you do that." "Like you warned me before bitten my neck so early in the morning?" he drawled, stifling a yawn with his free hand. "Seriously, you a vampire or something? Gonna try and suck my blood?" "Maybe, but..." Zero Two hummed softly, pushing her head into his palm. "Still, I'd say it was worth it," she purred. "You taste better when you're excited." "Wasn't aware I had a taste." Naruto arched an eyebrow. "Although..." The pinkette blinked. "Although..." He flashed her a foxy smile. "Turnabout is fair play, you know." Then her world upended. Quick as greased lightning, the Jinchuriki pushed her down across the long seats and pinned her there by the shoulders. Startled as she was, the Oni didn't bother to resist. A noise of pleasant surprise fled from her lips as she crashed into the seat, the thin foam creaking beneath her light body. Her cap went flying, her pink hair spooling out to form a vibrantly pale halo behind her head in the wan sunlight. Emerald eyes widened in pleasant surprise, and despite her initial shock, Zero Two found herself smiling. Had anyone else attempted such a feat, she would have killed them on the spot. Not Naruto. Not him. No, never him. After all, Naruto was her darling. She'd won him for herself. Staked her claim. Should anyone ever challenge that claim again, she'd tear them apart. Plain and simple. Be it that bitch, Papa, or the Nines, even that mad doctor, they'd all die. She'd see to it herself. No one would take her happiness away. She'd sooner die by her own hand than allow such an event to transpire. Yes, she was stronger now. She could fight. He could fight. They were powerful now. Soon, they might even be able to escape for good. If her darling's plan worked, they wouldn't even need to worry about fuel for Strelizia. "Say, darling, what were you reading anyway?" Naruto fixed her with a dark look. "Not telling." As she looked on, a thin red tether of corrosive light jutted from his back and slapped the book shut. Another laid it to rest on the seat opposite them. Right. She'd almost forgotten he could do this. That was a handy ability to have. She almost wished she could do the same. But other thoughts demanded precedence. Far more enticing things. Heartened by his smile just as much as his proximity to her, Zero Two leaned up and kissed him with reckless abandon, nipping his lip with her sharp teeth in her haste to reach him. A hand cupped her cheek, and she was quick to wind her arms around his back and pull him close. Part of her reveled in the low growl it drew from him, even as Hit bit her. There was nothing gentle about this kiss, in part because the two of them simply lacked any sort of restraint when it came to the other. They were monsters, masquerading as humans. Some might even call them demons. One sought humanity above all else. The other disdained it with such bitter vehemence that they'd sooner seen the world burn than save it. She never got tired of this. His tongue ruthlessly plundered her mouth even as her fingers sought the zipper of his jacket. Calloused hands slipped into her jacket with practiced ease, finding the firm curves beneath, squeezing, kneading, fondling them until she nearly went mad. Her horns burned. Emerald eyes nearly blazed red. "Hey, darling." Her hands rose with liquid speed and grace, seizing his face, cupping his whiskered cheeks within her palms, forcing him to look her in the eye. Yes, this was what she wanted. For him to look at her. Her and only her. He didn't need anyone else. Only her. The two of them were all that mattered in this world. Let the rest burn. She felt as if she would if he didn't give her what she wanted. As if her entire being would combust, right here on the spot. "Do I seem a little more human to you now?" she purred. Azure and red eyes blinked at her, baffled. "What are you talking about?" You? Laughter burst out of her in a rush. "Aha, that's what I like to hear, come here." Laughing, she licked his cheek. "Why are ya licking me again, oi?" A beat of silence pushed between them. "I didn't say stop." Zero Two flashed her teeth. "Thanks for the meal." As ever, he tasted delicious. She couldn't put the flavor into words. He really did taste better when he was excited. She couldn't get enough of this. It made her want to devour him, to claim him, To have him and take him here and now, to mark him and truly make him hers, so that the whole world would know. He was her darling. This much was true, but she was also his. Forever and ever and ever. Till death did them part. No, she'd defy death in a heartbeat if it meant spending even a moment more with him, basking in his presence, bathing in his scent. Speaking of bathing, unbidden an idea was born. I want to take a bath, she declared suddenly. Can we land already? Where in blazes did that come from? The idea of ravaging him in weightless waters was suddenly, impossibly appealing to her. There wouldn't be anyone to stop them there, away from prying eyes, all distractions glow stripped away. The very thought of it made her skin buzz with anticipation. Perhaps her darling sensed her desire, because he propped himself up on the points of his elbows and fixed her with a curious glance. Curiosity dawned into realization as she ran a manicured hand across the scarred plane of his chest, teasing him, promising more. Oh, another blink. Well, we could just jump in Strelizia and… No, not again, Dr. Frankxx groaned 2 seats ahead of them, his hollow voice cracking in annoyance. Show some self-control, both of you. You can bathe once we get off the plane. Together. After all, they'd attempted such a stunt more times than he cared to count. Jinchuriki and Oni shared a single, mischievous look of amusement. Well, when you put it like that. Smirking, Zero Two thrust her wrist beneath Naruto's nose. Hey, darling. How do I smell? The blonde snickered softly at her. Sweet, I guess? She grinned at him. Is that so? Dr. Frankxx groaned anew. Sheesh, what a high maintenance. Pair you two are. Speaking of maintenance. Does Plantation 13 have an ocean? An ocean? The woman beside him, Nana, or something she vaguely recalled, blinked at Zero Two's suddenly inquiry. After a moment's consideration, she fixed a thoughtful smile to her face, hiding the fear she felt. That didn't bother Zero Two. She'd grown used to being feared. So long as her darling didn't fear her, that was all that mattered. And the others? She couldn't care less. But enough about them. The idea of going for a swim slammed itself against her thoughts, demanding precedence. Yeah, an ocean. Naruto exhaled in a long-suffering sigh. Great. Look what you've done. She'll never stop now. What? The Oni pouted, rubbing her head into the crook of his neck. I just want to swim in some clear ocean water. I'm sorry to say there's no ocean there. Nana admitted. Won't a shower do? I'm in the mood for a swim, the hybrid sulked. A shower just won't cut it for me. Before the redhead could attempt to argue further, a low voice chimed overhead. We'll be descending shortly. Please sit down and buckle your seatbelts. Guess that's our cue then. Zero Two felt the beginnings of a scowl pluck at her face. Serasis, otherwise known as Plantation 13, loomed below them now, growing larger with each passing moment. She'd almost forgotten about that. Tisk, isn't this the plantation where that girl wound up? She shot the dome below a dark glower and bit her thumb as an old memory bubbled beneath the surface. Say, why do we have to accompany the old geezer anyway? It's not like they need us for a testing. It's a waste of time. I'd rather be killing Klaxosaurs. A hand settled on her head, massaging her temples until her anger faded. Didn't know you kept track of that sort of thing, Zero Two? Rounding on her darling, the hybrid flashed him a toothy grin. I always keep track of my enemies, darling. A beat of silence passed between the two of them. Each monster exchanged a long, pointed look. Inexorably, a crazed smile blossomed on both their faces, only to be stifled moments later. No words were needed. No gestures exchanged. After spending so many days together, they'd long since learned to read one another at the slightest glance. One might even call it telepathy, of a sort. Like their bond born from years spent together, their plan was shared and agreed upon in an instant. Zero Two glanced over her shoulder to where Strelizia was kept, and sure enough, Naruto followed her gaze like a magnet pulled in her wake. All that remained was the timing, seeing who would break first. Yes, tea was merely a matter of time. When all was said and done, Naruto caved mere moments before she did. Fuck it, he shouted, tearing at his hair. I can't stand it any more. We're taking Strelizia. See you on the surface, old man. What? Dr. Frankxx bristled. Don't you dare, 09 absolutely not 02 stop him. Too late, Naruto jerked upright and bolted, dragging her with him. 02 burst into a fresh fit of giggles as they ran. See? This is why you're my darling. Promise you'll never betray me. Prepare for trouble. Humans are ugly. They're selfish, vain, prone to cruelty at the drop of the hat. They fear what they don't understand and try to destroy that which they can never possess. What they cannot create, they steal. What they are unable to build, they ruin. They are spiteful creatures, seeking only to tear down any who rise above their station. Lacking horns or claws, they choose to seek shelter in numbers, forming groups for the sake of safety. They rely on strict social dogma to bind others in place, all the while reaching out for more themselves at the expense of others. Ever greedy, they are never content with their lot in life. They are a plague on this land. Yet they are also capable of great kindness, empathy, compassion, understanding. For all their penchant for greed and cruelty, they're capable of great sacrifice when it counts. They can be kind, protect, gentle, in spite of all reason and logic. Sometimes they even fall in love, start a family, raise their young, grow old together, and after a number of years die together. They live short lives, filled with brilliant passion. They burn bright and then they wither away. In the end, all that remains of them are their children, and then their children's children. And so the cycle continues. In a way, their legacy lives on. Yes, humans are ugly, pitiful creatures. Nothing to be envied, surely. Even so, I thought I could be one. I wanted that happiness. I wanted love. I wanted a family. Warm arms around me. Laughter in my ears. A horde of horned children playing at my feet. It was an impossible dream born from a tattered picture book shared by a boy and a girl. Forged from a promise. A small smile. A warm hand clasped tight in mine. To this day, I've never forgotten it. So I swore. I would do it. Whatever it took. For my sake and my darling. No matter what was asked of me. Even if it meant everything else would burn. Scene break. Piloting Strelizia was just like falling. Rather ironic, consider that was precisely what Naruto and 02 were doing now. Controls were secondary for them, indeed, almost unnecessary by comparison compared to most pairs. Especially when one considered the depth of their bond and the memories they shared. Pistol and Stamen were one, unified in mind, if not body. No secrets were kept between them. No discord lurked in their thoughts. Here in this moment, nothing stood in their way, not the heavens, nor the earth, or even the very air they breathed. With each passing second he went deeper inside one another's mind. Tumbling toward Plantation 13 in a controlled descent, neither felt fear. Indeed, one could say they experienced the opposite. Not mind-numbing terror, but delight. There was only release. Sweet plus joy. Rapture. Cliché to be sure, but Naruto couldn't think of a better way to describe this experience. 02's need to escape the stifling rules that bound them melded with his penchant for mischief, creating an overpowering urge to wreak havoc on the world and fly in the face of those who sought to stop them. Meanwhile, his own excitement slaked her lust for life in a way no other could, the two surging and mixed together to create a high of absurd proportions. Yet in the same vein he was infinitely aware of their surroundings, their shared pulse pounding in his ears, her wild laughter, the lance griped tight in her hand, the wild wind on his face, despite the cockpit shielding them. In a sense, they were Strelizia. Euphoria, mindless and happy, roared through him. He wasn't the only affected by the shared linking of minds. Mine, 02's voice wrapped itself around his body like a warm blanket, reverberating from Strelizia's mouth. No one else can have you, darling. A grin dimpled his face. All right, save that for the surface. Oh, found one. He felt her delight long as strongly as it was his own, even as she spoke. Wait, I see it. Red and blue eyes craned eastward, seeking the image he'd found in her mind, the glassy surface of a small lake. Sure enough, there it lay, rushing towards them at blistering speeds. That it was beneath the dome of the plantation didn't register as a concern. They just have to smash through it. Strelizia's magma lance had shorn through the supposedly impenetrable hides of Klaxosaurs like butter. Time after time, she had pieced each of her targets without fail. She was more than suited to destroying a mere viewport, transparent though it was. Neither spared a thought to the trouble it might land them in. What did they care? As far as they were concerned, this was shaping up to be a good day. Each pilot shared a grin. You thinking what I'm thinking? Right then. Let's do this hard and... He would have said more had his right arm not twitched. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw something there. The hell was that? A muscle spasm or something? Am I seeing things? Darling? Hey, it's nothing. Shrugging it off, the whiskered warrior hunched low over the controls. Fire up the boosters. Despite his mild concern at the cause of that strange twinge, Naruto felt a small smile tug at the corners of his mouth as he listened to her laughter. There was just something so liberating about piloting with Zero Two. Here in the cockpit with comms muted and the perpetually grating voice of Dr. Frankxx nowhere to be found, they could do as they pleased. Yes, there was no one to interfere with them here. No adults to bark orders. No superiors to admonish or threaten them with punishment, nor chains to hold them down. It felt like flying. Or falling in your case. Damn it. Naruto sighed and closed his eyes, knowing full well what he would find lurking there. Sure enough, his surroundings faded to black. Water pooled around his ankles. He opened them and saw. In his mind's eye, a massive scarlet orb dominated the entirety of Naruto's vision. Large enough that the young man could see his own reflection within, his prisoner gazed back at him, unfazed by his temerity, even as his own altered visage stared back at him in a grisly relief. Hot breath wafted across his face as a snout-bearing row upon endless row of sharpened teeth peeled back to expose jagged canines. In spite of his proximity, he only beheld a mere fourth of its body in darkness of the cage. The vaguest outline of 9 tails shifting in the wan light. No, to call the creature large would have done it a disservice. The fox was enormous. Here in the seal, time held no meaning. His prisoner could spend days ripping him apart if he caught him. Devour him in an instant and only a moment would have passed on the outside. Crush him with a flick of a paw, and Zero Two wouldn't be able to stop him. Naruto suspected the QB would have happily done all this and more ages ago, were it not for the circumstances of their unique arrangement. If he died, the might perish with him. Or take years to reconstitute as anything resembling itself. The beast knew this and thus, it wouldn't harm him. At least in theory. Alright, fuzzball. What do you want? That impossible eye loomed before him. You know what I want. Let me out. We had an agreement. We did. The blonde's head bobbed in agreement. That much hasn't changed. Thunder crashed in his ears. Then why am I still trapped here? Release me. Another shake of the head. Sorry, no can do. Why? Look, we've been over this already. A small scowl dimpled his whiskered cheeks as he gazed up at the monstrosity. The answer is still no. I let you out, you take over my body and kill everyone. I'm quite happy as I am, thank you very much. Besides, last I checked, you haven't upheld your end of the bargain. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Zero Two and I need you to escape. And if I were to let you out completely, pretty sure it'd kill me. Until we find a way around that. A hand rose and fell. No life, no freedom. A dark shape reared up over him. Brat, you wouldn't be so smug without those bars. He didn't flinch when a sunset-colored paw crunched against the bars between the two of them. The cage rattled, but impossibly, they held. After all, those rusted bars, door bearing the world seal inscribed upon them, were all that separated them from one another. Nothing short of his own will could open it, and he maintained a firm leash on his emotions in that regard. Anything else would allow the Biju to gain a hold on him, which would in turn corrode the seal even further than it had already regressed. No, he needed to keep hold of his emotions, lest he... Oh, fuck it. Naruto felt his eye twitch. Excuse me? You heard me. White teeth flashed at him in the dark. Come into the cage, boy, if you dare. A muscle jumped in his jaw. And if I don't? The grin grew. Pussy. The torrent. In the past he had been grateful for the barrier. It had given him a modicum of safety. Comfort from the dark. Now he scorned it. Slipping between the bars, Naruto forsook the protection afforded to him by the cage and stepped into the darkness. An irritated growl greeted his affront, but otherwise the Ninetales didn't move anything beyond its wild gaze. Those iridescent orbs followed his every move. That menacing smile dominating his field of view. Just a bit closer and he'd be well within arm's reach. He tried not to think about that. He was essentially walking into the arms of a teeming mass of hatred. If he lost himself, even for a moment, a fusillade of missiles slammed into his side. Engulfed as he was in crimson, he scarcely felt them. Though fire burned and napalm raged around him, he endured it all. His mind had one focus, one desire that superseded all else. Pain meant nothing. Hate meant nothing. Death meant nothing. There was only her. For tails thrashed behind him, demanding destruction, tainting his mind with each passing second. But even so he held on. Marshalling his will, he refused to fall to anger. For his dream. For her. And this was an obstacle to them both. Yes, that was all the enemy was. And he knew just what to do with obstacles. But before that, before the enemy, the fox snarled in aggravation. Give her back. Viciously, he shook off the vision. Showing me that won't startle me, you know. Those eerie red orbs beckoned him in the silence. Yes, that's the way, the beast purred. Closer, boy. Naruto gulped and steeled himself, never once faltering in his stride. It wasn't that he didn't feel any fear. Of course he did. Only a psychopath would walk into the jaws of a beast without a plan. He knew that the QB needed him as much as he needed it. One could not exist without the other. If the fox was trying to lure him into a trap, it would be sorely disappointed. Besides, this was his mind. He was at his strongest here. Nothing was beyond him. After all, he'd been riding with Zero Two. He was far from human. Perhaps someone needed to be reminded of that. In a liquid blur he seized the kitsune's nearby paw and pulled. Not just on its physical form, but the boundless chakra lurking beneath. Gak? A startled snarl greeted him as the QB lost its balance, yelping as its body lurched forward and crashed into the shallow water with a thunderous crash. Naruto wasted no time. Even as the towering mass of chakra rose and slipped through his fingers, he reached out with his free hand and latched onto the fluffy ear that had just fallen within reach. This time the kitsune's collapse was more profound. And much closer. Suddenly, Kurama's visage loomed before his, eyes wide with shock. Shock that a mere human had managed to overpower its strength, however briefly. Utilizing his new leverage, the Jinchuriki hauled his captive close and glared into those massive orbs. You'll do nothing, he hissed, baring sharpened teeth in the face of adversity. You need me and I need you. Now, listen, I don't hate you, and I'm pretty damn sure you've got some misdirected anger toward me or some shit. Frankly, I don't understand it. But until the day comes that Zero Two and I are free, you are going to help us. Damn it, do you understand? Silence reigned supreme. Kurama snorted. You indignant, little. Taunt fingers pressed against its iris. Try me. I'm not above blinding you, you know. Kurama went terribly, apoplectically still in his grasp. He expected an outburst, one final fit of indignation. Something. He wasn't prepared for the massive creature to inexplicably wither against him. Have it your way. I'll let you in on a little secret, then. You want my power that badly? Quite suddenly, the fox shifted. Then have a taste. Reality rushed back in to fill the void. Pain blossomed in his forehead and something twisted in his chest. Then his world went red. His body bent double, nodding inward on itself. Every muscle clamped down as one. The pain he felt roared through the link and slammed into Zero Two like an angry Klaxosaur. For the briefest moment, their link gave a tremulous warble. Strelizia's joints stiffened and bent awkwardly. Rather than anger, a wave of concern and confusion washed from her to him. Invisible hands pressed against his psyche, frantically seeking the source of his pain and beating the agony back with invisible yet equally determined blows. Darling. Strelizia Snow, Zero Two-Face appeared on the screen beside him, red eyes fraught with concern. What happened? had she not been bound up in Strelizia, he sensed she would have rushed him in an instant. "Are you all right? Did you really think it would be that easy?" The kitsune's dark voice descended on his thoughts like a cold wave, dousing the raging flames of his enthusiasm in an instant. "That you could ride this many times without suffering any consequences? Idiot. I've been delaying the inevitable. Let's see how long you survive once you become a monster." Straightening up, Naruto wiped a thin line of red from his nose. "I'm fine," he grit his teeth. "Just focus on landing." Too late, he saw the dome rushing up at them. Darling? Might want to hold on to." Naruto swore a black streak. Zero Two pulled up. Too late. Shit. Scene break. Goro wasn't having a good day. It had all started with his partner being crankier than usual. For the life of him, he couldn't figure out what had set Ichigo off. One moment she'd been calm, cool, and collected as they prepared for the ceremony. The next, she started screaming and flinging things. In the end, she'd all but decked Zorome, which in turn had drawn Miku into her partner's plight. That had gotten Futoshi's intention, thereby involving the well-intentioned Kokoro as well. Of course Goro, good boy that he was, had tried to mediate. From there, everything snowballed. When all was said and done, words were said that couldn't be taken back and they'd gone to cool their heads. Honestly, Goro considered it something of a miracle that Mitsuru and Ikuno had stayed out of it. Yet the conflict remained. Ichigo. He still couldn't predict her. They needed to be better than this. She together with him were meant to lead this squad. But how could they lead when everyone was at each other's throat? Hiro was always able to calm her down before he'd been taken. Stolen away, like the others. Perhaps that was what had broken her. Always questioning, always trying to help others. Perhaps the adults had simply grown tired of his endless inquiries and done away with him. The thought made his ear clench. Hiro would have known what to do. Ichigo hadn't been like this back then. After his disappearance, she turned inward on herself. Less and less did she smile. Now that cheerful, energetic girl he'd fallen in love had become so infrequent to the point that she scarcely existed. In her place stood a stranger, someone he scarcely recognized. For a time, there had been another boy, and she had improved. Naruto. Goro had barely known him. Indeed, they'd scarcely spoken more than a handful of times before he disappeared as well. Unlike Hiro, this one departed of his own volition, leaving the garden ahead of them. They'd never met again, but he'd heard the rumors. Some said he had found a partner of his own. Others claimed he'd tamed a monster. Still more insisted that he was a monster, one who drained the life of anyone who wandered too close to him. Just stories. A misunderstanding, surely. The Naruto he'd known had left him with a message before departing, and that message contradicted all the petty gossiping he'd heard. "Oi Goro, do me a favor and take care of Ichigo, you know? You're the best boy after all." While he didn't necessarily know what this whole best boying business was about, Goro had taken those words to heart. He tried. He truly had. He's tried to bring the light back to her Ichigo's eyes. Then it faded to nothing, just as Hiro had. And Ichigo deteriorated further still. Still, she was his partner. But for how long? Were all their friends destined to vanish, one by one? In the end, he'd sought solace near the lake. It was a peaceful place, devoid of the distractions and chaos that often filled the dormitory. A private place, known to him and him alone. His own private getaway. No one came here but the birds. Here, he could clear his head and muster his thoughts. At least, that had been the plan. Instead, he found his thoughts a twisted, thorny maze. It just wasn't any good. He doubted any of them himself included would be able to pilot a Frankxx at this rate, much less work together. They needed proper leadership, and as much as it pained him to say it, Ichigo wasn't providing that leadership. Perhaps he should suggest a change in leadership to the brass? Another conversation he wasn't looking forward to. At least the weather would be nice today. Perhaps he'd find peace here. Fate had other plans. Geronimo, the Frankxx? That was all he heard as a red and white mecha slammed through the ceiling above and crashed through the dome with a demented laugh. Traveling at obscene speed, it registered as little more than a wild mottled blur in his peripherals. With a wordless roar, it crashed into the lake, creating a terrible wave that soaked all unfortunate enough to be nearby. Triumphant, it planted its lance into the lake and gave itself a mighty shake, large shoulders flailing about like a happy puppy divesting itself of unwanted mud, drenching the pilot further still. It had been such a nice afternoon too. Then the telltale hiss of steam signaled an open cockpit and his attention was decidedly elsewhere. Even at this distance, the pistol's features were striking. Clad in a red form-fitting bodysuit she emerged, pink hair trailing behind her like a long ribbon. Goro scarcely noticed. Horns. Those were horns jutting from her forehead. If her fierce green eyes saw him, she paid him no more notice than one would a squirrel. Her smile was a ray of sunshine, sharpened teeth flashing in the clearing mist. Delighted laughter burst out of the girl as her stamen emerged behind her, his face half hidden in the gloom, but clearly no less pleasing to her, judging by the way she leaned against him. Yes, 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 the girl's voice cried out into the fog. We're here, we made it, darling, race you to the water. As he looked on, she did the unthinkable. In one smooth movement, the Pinkette seized her pilot suit and tore it away from her body, shucking it over her shoulder into the Frankxx. Ah, there we go, she crowed, stretching. Much better. Sputtering, the pilot Tobe hastily averted his eyes. Oi, her partner sighed, no need to rush. Then she rounded on him. Your turn, darling. Muffled laughter greeted her bold declaration. To his credit, he tried to escape. He just failed horribly. Oi, wait a minute, Zero Two, you can't just tear my suit off and there it goes, I like that thing, damn it. A heartbeat later, the torn remains of his suit joined hers. Laughing, she gave him a shove. Don't care and you go. His naked form toppled backward into the water and after a moment's hesitation, the latter plunged in after them. A moment later they re-emerged, with the former tackling the latter, driving her under the water yet again with a mad laugh. In the face of this new development, Goro's level-headedness momentarily deserted him. As well it should, when confronted with two naked people diving in the lake. Who the hell were they? Where had they come from? What were they doing in his spot? What was going on? What in the what did they just? Pwats, the Pinkette surfaced suddenly and abruptly, a feral smile adorning her pale face. You'll pay for that. A spiky yet strangely familiar mop of hair erupted from the water. Gotta catch me first? There was something terrifying in that smile of hers, yet also inordinately pure. As though she were experiencing the joy of swimming for the first time in her life. With a determined cry she dove back under, but not before flashing the bespectacled blonde with a significant view of her hindquarters. She erupted up again an instant later, arrowing headlong into the blonde's chest and driving him into the shallows. Her hands pushed him down as swiftly as he found him, all but crawling her way into the blonde's submerged lap. There was something decidedly intimate about the pose, one that had Goro flushing despite his lack of knowledge. Gotcha, darling, she purred, trailing a hand across her partner's face. I'll be claiming my reward now. The young man raised his hands in surrender. Don't suppose you'll show mercy? Her eyes all but burned red. Her eyes burned red? Not on your life. And with that moment, Goro's suspension of disbelief finally reached its utmost of limits. Wading into the water as far as he dared, he frantically waved his hands at them. Now hold on just a minute, just what are you two doing here? Each pilot turned to regard him, the latter in irritation. The girl tilted her head in thinly veiled annoyance. Who the hell are you? Don't interrupt us. That's my line, what are you doing? The pilot growled at him. Mustering his faltering courage, Goro fought to avert his eyes while simultaneously meeting the Pinkette's gaze. Needless to say, he failed spectacularly. She was the very picture of dangerous beauty, someone who you knew you should stay away from, yet couldn't help but be drawn toward all the same. In a word, bewitching. Though, judging by her glower, he was going to losing something important if he didn't make himself scarce, or simply faint dead away immediately. Whichever came first. Even then, he couldn't bring himself to move. Isn't that obvious? Darling and I were just about to finally. The last word sailed right over Goro's head. I don't get it, why reunite? The Pinkette tilted her head aside. What? Because it feels good. Even so, you can't just take. Then Goro beheld the blonde. Wait a second, Naruto? The pilot smiled mildly. Long time no see? So you wanna ride me, huh? Zero Two. Some kind of monster. I didn't want to help those kids. They were going to die. Why hasten that? Why should I? My darling was all I needed. In my mind he was all I ever would need. I had no need for friends. No one else had ever been there for me, and I had little desire to be there for them. It wasn't shyness. Nor was it anger. I simply didn't know how to interact with others. I knew what it was to love and to hate someone. Two extremes of the same spectrum. Towards others I merely felt indifference. Pity at the worst, mischievous at best when my darling was involved. What more did I need? I didn't need to be kind to Theme if only because I knew my darling would do that for me. He was always good at that, concealing anger behind a smile. Sometimes he even fooled me. Right until the end, they had no idea what we thought of them. We met Garo first. That was one introduction I couldn't forget. The rest were a blur to me at first. Static. I nodded, muttered words I didn't feel. Bit down on my emotions when I saw her. She was there. Broken in spirit perhaps, but still alive. Still a thorn in my side. She didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. I was a far cry from the skittish little thing she'd seen that day, and my horns were hidden by that cap. Or maybe they'd erased her memory of me. But she recognized Naruto. I knew that awe and adoration in her eyes, and it made me sick. I wanted to gouge them out. Even after all these years, she still pined for him. She didn't want to believe the words he'd flung at her that day. I could see it. She wanted to take him away from me and have him all to herself. And she would in a heartbeat if the opportunity arose. I almost killed her right then and there. Mercifully, when the adults came to whisk us off to the startup ceremony, we were separated. Even so, I committed their names to memory, because darling asked me to. Goro, the boy who smiled like my darling. Brave yet somehow sad. Zorom, persistent, stubborn, but kind to others in turn. Mitsuru, strange, nebulous secret roiling in mystery. Futoshi, soft but gentle. Large in heart and body. Ichigo, the one whom I was determined to kill. Miku, loud, determined, yet also passionate. Kuroro, just too kind for her own good. Ikuno, her head stuck in a book. Naomi, a girl with no place. My memories are fuzzy regarding the 9 of them toward the end of things. Who was it that I killed? Who was it that tried to kill me? Who survived? Who died? We lost one to foolish pride. Another by their own hand. A third vanished. One would become like a sister to me, a relative in all but blood. I can't remember the rest. What? Do I remember their faces? Of course I do. I even considered a few of them friends by the end. But they could never be anything more to me than that. I didn't have room in my heart for anyone else. Even the one I accepted was a pale shadow compared to the depth of my depraved devotion to my darling. I wonder if she knew that. It didn't matter. So long as he was by my side, I could survive. But if something happened to him, darling, darling, darling. Whenever I thought of him being taken away from me, those thoughts overpowered my mind. I saw red. My mind couldn't fathom the thought of a life without him. I lived for him. Existed for him. Just as he did for me. Extreme codependency at its finest. We brought out the best in each other, but we also summoned the worst in others. Perhaps that was our curse. To be happy, while destroying all those around us. Maybe that became our fate. A plague upon others, while a blessing for the two of us. We didn't pay it any mind. Perhaps, if we had been more understanding, more of them might have survived. Scene break. I smell a Klaxosaur. Zero Two inhaled reflexively and tilted her head back as the wind picked up, breathing deep as the faint aroma reached her nose. Strands of pink wafted into her vision, but she paid them no heed. Her gaze focused upon the horizon with searing intensity. Perched just outside of Strelizia's cockpit, she beheld the distant cloud of fog. Yup. No doubt about it. She recognized the telltale metallic odor in the distance anywhere. After countless battles with her darling, the stench was impossible to miss. It seemed. Today would actually be good for something other than meaningless talk after all. She needed this. If not the Klaxosaur, than because she absolutely needed to kill something right now. She was still in something of a foul mood after being interrupted at the lake by Goro. What should have been an intimate, secluded moment of their first time had instead turned sour. A bit of battle might be just the thing to take the edge off. It might even scratch that itch. And afterward, there would be plenty of to find a nice quiet place with her darling. Just the thought of it was enough to get Zero Two's pulse racing. So, the Oni hummed into the wind. "Are you ready?" No response came. She frowned. "Darling?" Green eyes swept back to find her partner dead asleep in the cockpit and utterly oblivious to the coming storm. Head lolled to the side, he snored softly, a thin line of drool escaping his mouth. In spite of her best efforts, Zero Two felt her right eye begin to twitch. Part of her was tempted to pounce on him and shout until he was awake. That would have been too easy. After all, her darling wasn't to blame. She'd been keeping him awake for the last day and a half with her antics, thus he hadn't had a chance to sleep once they'd arrived. Still, how to wake him? Decisions. In the end, mischief won out. Creeping back into the cockpit, she crawled into his lap and wrapped both arms around him. For a moment she simply lay there, taking a moment to admire her mate sprawled out beneath her. Times like these reminded her just how lucky she'd been. How fortunate to have found someone who understood her, and she him. Yes, he might snore loud enough to wake the dead, but there would never be any qualms between them. Odd. Did his teeth seem a tad sharper than before? Almost as if he had grown fangs since she'd last seen his teeth. Curious, she hooked a finger under his lip and pulled them back to see. Her partner barely twitched in his slumber. "Geez, you're a heavy sleeper." Sure enough, she saw. There they were. Yes, she thought to herself, those canines were decidedly sharper than the last time she'd seen them. Just like hers. This was a pleasant development. She'd known for ages that he wasn't human, but if he was becoming more like her because of their shared bond, then who was she complain? Humming contently to herself, Zero Two leaned in against him, her partner, her lips brushing the outer lobe of his ear. Part of her was tempted to bite him again, but she had the sense he'd be prepared for that this time. After all, she'd never gotten him the same way twice. So instead, she licked his ear. Naruto jerked back to wakefulness with a start, flailing madly. "I'm up," he sputtered. "I wasn't sleeping, not at all." "Then why were your eyes closed?" she teased. A light chop descended upon her head. "Someone woke me up early this morning." An impish smile won out, and in the end, Zero Two chose to drape herself over him anew. A gloved hand trailed over his chest, fingertips dancing in silent promise. His arm tightened around her waist in response, drawing her close. For a time they chose to lay there, gazing up at the blue sky, simply basking in the warmth of one another. What had Naruto called it? Cuddling. Even after all these years, she still struggled with words sometimes. Speaking of a struggle, she likely wasn't going to get a better chance to ask than this. Darling," she purred, gazing up at him through her long lashes. "When we're done here, can I kill her?" Naruto went rigid in her arms, eyes turning to narrow slits. "Wait, what are you talking about now?" "Ooh." Exasperated, she gave him a light shake. "You know her, Ichigo." "Oh, absolutely not." His response drew a rare frown from Zero Two. "Che, spoil sport," she sniffed. "Why can't I? Look, the two of you might have your differences, but she's not an enemy. She's our ally." Relaxing in her arms, the blonde patted her head, but his words still didn't lose their edge. "We don't kill allies unless they give us a good reason." Unspoken was the warning. Don't try. He knew her too well. If the brunette tried to horn in on her territorino, pun intended, she wouldn't find a happy ending. Only death awaited her. She wouldn't brook a challenger for her mate, not after the hell she'd gone through to keep him. That he would deny her the chance to eliminate a rival, well, in all honesty, it rankled her. "She wants to steal you." Indignant, she bit her thumb. "Isn't that reason enough?" "She can't steal me," Naruto answered patiently. "Don't worry about it." "But I am worried," she growled at him. "And I'm not," he retorted. Unsatisfied with his apparent nonchalance on the matter, the horned Oni shifted in his lap and pressed her forehead against his. If Naruto was at all bothered by her horns scraping his head, he did little to show it. His gaze met hers and did not falter. Perhaps he realized just how serious she was. Whatever the case, he didn't yield to her anger and stood his ground. The unstoppable force of her desires met the immovable object that was his iron will, and neither budged. In the end, their shared resolve negated one another, leaving them in a stalemate. "Why are you smiling?" That actually made him laugh. Grinning, he gave her a light headbutt. "But, because I love you, of course. Why else?" Despite her anger, Zero Two caught herself grinning. "Smooth. But it'll take more than your silver tongue, Tom." Her words found themselves muffled as Naruto quietly leaned up in the seat and smothered her protests with his mouth. Startled by the unexpected but nevertheless welcome kiss, Zero Two stiffened briefly. Emerald eyes widened a hair, then narrowed, gliding shut now as she melted into her partner's embrace. In a heartbeat she returned his affections tenfold. A low growl started up in his throat as she began to grind her hips against his, the friction of their suits sending an almost electric tingle through their bodies while their tongues tangled with one another. It wasn't enough. It never was. Her body ached for him. She longed to push him down and have her way with him in a way she'd never done before. Because there were always interruptions. "Say, what was that about my tongue?" Naruto chuckled up at her as her hands fisted in his hair. "I really want to get this suit off you right now," she hissed in response. "Ah, so you're just using me for my body?" "I'm hurt," the blonde clutched at his chest, feigning injury. Deeply, deeply hurt, and here I thought we had something special over you." "Shut up before I bite you again." Sure. Though their infernal suits prevented either of them from truly enjoying one another to the fullest, they eventually slaked their lust enough to blunt desire's edge and recline in one another's arms. Of the Klaxosaur Zero Two had briefly scented before, there was still no sign. It was either hiding from them or deliberately biding its time, waiting for the chance to strike. Whatever the case, Zero Two was content to ignore it for now. It would have to reveal itself to attack the plantation regardless. In the meantime, she relished the chance to have some personal time with her beloved. Belatedly, a thought occurred to her. "Hey, darling." The warmth of his breath momentarily seared the back of her neck. "Something on your mind? Do you remember anything about your home?" she whispered. Before him, a low laugh rumbled just behind her. "Where's this coming from, oi? I'm just curious." Right. Didn't press the issue further. He realized just how seriously she'd been. "Wait, honestly?" Zero Two inclined her head in a tiny nod. In the distance she heard Papa speaking, but she ruthlessly tuned him out. "Stupid old man. He get his someday. We will hereby begin the startup ritual. With this, you children will finally become official parasites." When Naruto finally spoke, she instantly forgot her anger. "I mean, it's complicated, you know." Her partner shrugged restlessly, shifting his weight slightly against her in a better attempt to lay his chin on her shoulder. "I don't remember it all that well." Those wild, mismatching eyes stared over at the horizon with her, gazing into that perpetual distance. "I've got a few vague ones, I guess." "Faces? Words? Names? Places?" Grainy images floating around in my head. Think? A rare note of confusion threaded its way into his voice, lending his next words an almost uneven tone. "Whenever I think about them, it's like I'm trapped in a fog. I can't recall anything meaningful. Does that help? A little? Do you remember anything?" Now it was his turn to probe her. "Before we met? I remember a hand," she relented after a moment. "A hand?" Naruto frowned. "That's all." "Mom?" She nodded. "Weird." In a sense, Zero Two empathized with her darling. Whatever memories she had of that's before time were long since faded to the point of non-existence. If they'd ever existed at all. She supposed it didn't matter in any case. If they truly were important, then she would never have forgotten them to begin with. She had her darling, and that was all that mattered. The rest of her past could burn to ash for all she cared, and the world with it. So long as she had him. "Oh, wait." He was speaking again. "Where we came from doesn't matter." A hand lifted her chin from behind and she yielded to it happily, looking up at him. "Our home is wherever we make it." A beat of silence passed between the two of them. The ghost of a smile plucked at her mouth. You're such a flatterer. Wait, what? Wriggling out of his loose hold, Zero Two rounded in Naruto's lap to face him completely. It took all of her considerable self-control not to tear off his suit and have her way with him right then and there, consequences be damned. She truly was glad to have met her darling. Nuzzling her head into the crook of his neck, she favored him with a smoldering smile. Pleased with his response, she returned his earlier headbutt with one of her own, gently poking his forehead with her own and drawing a small grunt from the prone blonde in the process. You said our? Her breath warmed his face. Do you really want to ride me that badly? This is a trap, isn't it? He favored her with a small scowl. Are we talking about Strelizia or you? Her silent smile drew a small swallow from Naruto. Don't suppose I can have both, you know? A disbelieving laugh burst out of her. I love it when you get greedy, darling. Once more the floodgates broke, but this time Zero Two found herself powerless to ignore or resist her own desires. Crushing her lips against his, she thrust her tongue into his mouth and began tearing at his crimson suit with reckless abandon while forcing his body back as far as the cockpit would allow. Her hands threaded in his hair, holding him tight as they struggled with their pilot suits. Screw the damn things. She'd just have to tear them off before anyone could interrupt. Wait. Her desire dampened as she felt something on his scalp. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that shouldn't exist. Something hard. Oi, why were ya touching my head? Naruto groused. Shug, she glared at him. Hold still. Fine. In an instant Zero Two's brief bout of lust morphed into boundless curiosity, her inquisitiveness spiced with just a hint of rare excitement. With another gesture, she bade her darling to be absolutely still. He relented, albeit with a look of mild consternation on his part. Still, he didn't fight her ministrations, and for that she was grateful. Craning her neck to get a better view, the hybrid pushed her hands through the flaxen locks, determined to find that strange hard substance. She'd definitely felt something foreign before, which meant it had to be there, but where was? Her eyes widened as she beheld the truth. Oi, why'd you stop? Naruto groaned as her fingers ceased dancing across his scalp. That felt kinda nice, you know. Her lack of response drew a small frown from him. Oi, why were you smiling, Zero Two? The Oni beamed. No reason. Zero Two responded by crushing his face into her bosom. A muffled exclamation greeted her. What is this softness? The Oni only squeezed him all the more, further stifling his perverted protests. Inwardly her mind ricocheted off the walls, thoughts curling inward on themselves in chaotic relief. This shouldn't be possible. Indeed, it defied the very laws of nature itself. She'd long since suspected that her darling wasn't truly human, but to this extent? The sight of it both thrilled and terrified her in the same vein all at once. When had this begun? Was it because of her? Or had something changed in him? Perhaps neither of the two? They'd ridden into countless battles together, killed an innumerable amount of Klaxosaurs time after time, and she hadn't seen any real sign of change in her darling. So why now? What had changed? What would her darling say once he realized the truth? Finally, then came the fear. Would he hate her? An wretched snake of dread coiled in her gut, twisting into ugly knots. No, she mustn't tell him. Naruto was a good person, she knew that to be true, but he was also unpredictable. She could only guess at how he might react if she revealed the truth to him now. It shouldn't matter that this made her happy, how it secretly thrilled her to know he was slowly becoming more and more like her, yet it did. She wanted him to be happy. More than anything else in this world, she couldn't bear the thought of losing that smile. This would upset him. Thus, she wanted to keep a secret. But if she did, she risked breaking their promise. They'd sworn never to keep secrets from one another. To break that oath, to go back on her word. Alas, in the end, the choice was taken from her hands. So you gonna tell me why Ryu so happy? Slowly, carefully, Zero Two released him. Emerald's eyes met azure/crimson. Darling, you have horns? His countenance turned blank. You're kidding me, right? She shook her head. Strelizia, reflection. Unable to believe here, did he? Naruto turned his head away from her towards the innards of their Frankxx, glancing at the opaque walls of the cockpit. With a single command, the four walls of their room reflected the two of them, creating a strange sort of mirror image of each pilot. Not satisfied with this, the blonde raised an armored hand and rapidly snapped his fingers. With each successive flick of his fingers, the image zoomed in, focusing on the sole point of interest that she'd revealed to him. Magnify on me. 100%. The Frankxx did as it was asked. And the truth was revealed. Naruto blinked in shock. Touched his head. They certainly weren't located in the same place as those of Zero Two, but they were there regardless. He could feel the beginnings of them jutting between his hair. There, hardened nubs of crimson where he pressed his fingers down near the middle of his skull. Mismatching eyes gave them another glance in the screen's polarized reflection, narrowing in quiet annoyance. All the while, Zero Two watched him. Expectantly, waiting for any sign of outrage or sorrow on his part. Had she some insight to his mind in that moment, she might have thought otherwise. For her darling felt no anger towards heronly quiet chagrin. Kurama's words were coming back to haunt him. A hand rose to rub at the stubs, pushing the golden locks over them. Looks like I do, he shook his head on a sigh. Guess I won't be wearing helmets anymore. Wonder how long they'll get. Ha! The quiet serenity in his voice nearly took Zero Two aback. She'd expected anger. Despair. Something. Not whatever this was. This simple acceptance of his floored her. Was her darling really not bothered by them? Did he truly not care that she was slowly eroding his body and turning him into something else? It might not be a stretch to say his very humanity was at risk. Yet still he smiled at her. Didn't recoil from the knowledge of what she'd done to him, what she would continue to do unto him with every battle they fought. He was always smiling. Yes, in spite of her fear, he radiated nothing but sincerity. Sometimes she felt she didn't deserve it. How could anyone be allowed to possess such happiness? Tears gathered in her eyes, threatening to spill over. You're not mad, she ventured. And why would I be mad? Did he not understand? Now that she knew the truth, Zero Two experienced a rare pang of fear. Not just for herself, but for her darling as well. Like an icy knife in her gut, the knowledge cut deeper than any words ever could, etching itself into her very soul. He was becoming like her. A monster. He might even lose his human form. Didn't that frighten him? It ought to. No, it should. Any sane person would have turned tail and fled by now, screamed, run for the hills without looking back. Her lips quivered at the thought, yet if it would keep him safe. Because I'm turning you into a mon. A finger shot out and pressed itself against her lips. Again came that smile, pure and radiant as the very sun itself. Dummy. Didn't you hear what the old man said yesterday? I'm already a monster, remember? He tilted his head, regarding her with a sardonic smile. Is that what's been bothering you all this time? At her faltering nod, the whiskered warrior exhaled in a long-suffering sigh and patted her head. Knew it, it's not like you to fret over something like this. Besides, being a monster is better. Despite herself, the Oni sniffed. How so? He bared his teeth at her in a faux snarl. Because monsters get to do whatever the hell they want. Wah. With that last word, Naruto lunged upright with a surprisingly loud roar and sank firm fingers into her sides, pinning the pinkette in place on his lap. At first Zero Two didn't truly understand what her precious partner intended. It was only when those rough hands began to caress her waist in a most unexpected way that she realized what he was doing. A curious sensation welled up in her stomach, and despite her best attempts otherwise, she snickered. Perhaps sensing that brief bout of weakness, the whiskered warrior renewed his assault. Within moments she found herself doubling over, squirming helplessly in his grasp. Hey! Stop, she shrieked between fits of giggles. That tickles? Not until you smile, he declared. Not fair. She saw now. Zero Two understood. Darling, you're so broken. Wild laughter tumbled out of her in a heady rush. Flopping backwards, she fell to the floor of the cockpit, dragging her startled darling down with her. Naruto squawked in surprise, but she couldn't bring herself to care. As though she'd been relieved of a burden she wasn't even aware of. She could only laugh and clutch at her sides, her legs kicking uselessly at the air as his fingers wove a dancing tapestry of laughter across her belly. This was too much. Just too much. She laughed, not because of that, but thanks to him. Who knew she had been carrying this weight all this time? Now it was gone and she felt something she hadn't in years. Free. Hey, darling. She pushed him down. Her smile turned predatory. I think I'm ready for that ride now. Much to her amusement, he laughed up at her. Until a distant explosion saw fit to interrupt their moment. Are you kidding me? Naruto swore. Fucking Murphy's Law. That's fog rolling in, isn't it? An annoyed huff slipped out of Zero Two as craned her neck towards the distant plume of dust. She soon found herself biting back a scowl of her own. Sure enough, her keen eyes caught a flicker of telltale blue and black on the horizon through the open cockpit. It had to be a Klaxosaur. Nothing else could get that big. Closing the distance with slow, but inexorable speed, it seemed to grow larger with each passing moment. A distant rumble informed then that the plantation had opened fire on the invader, to no avail. If anything, the countermeasures seemed to excite the beast rather than impede its charge. Don't suppose we can ignore it, can we? For a fleeting instant, Naruto almost seemed to consider her words. How big? Moho class, he posited. Reluctantly, she nodded. Tisich, we can't sit around then. Easily larger than Strelizia, the Klaxosaur was a bipedal creature clad in black and blue relief. A ghastly, towering abomination propped up on two spindly legs with an equally skeletal tail to match. Even now it lumbered towards the plantation at a steady pace. Its design was almost comical by comparison. Bearing those stubby, useless arms and its massive head, it rather resembled a certain saurian. But that didn't make it any less dangerous than its larger brethren. That was something they knew all too well. Even a relatively average Mohorovic class could cause havoc if left unchecked near any plantation. Right then, rolling his shoulders, Naruto climbed back into his seat. Let's gut the bastard. Nice and quick. I'll hold you to that. A silent shiver of anticipation ran through Zero Two's body. Grinning, she slipped into her own area after him and hunched over the controls. Her limbs effortlessly slid home in their slots as the Frankxx came to life around them. Not just of the hunt, but what would finally come after. 2 interruptions were too many for her liking. There would not be a third. And if there was, well, she pitied the fool who dared interpose themselves upon their affairs at all. Her very blood boiled at the thought, eager and ready for battle. Which mode? She asked as the helmet slid over her head. Ruin? Nah, overkill. Just basic. Good. No more distractions after this, she growled, letting him take the controls. Ready? Naruto grunted. Set. Go/go. The world burned white and she found herself in his mind. The sheer desire she felt there nearly swamped her and almost sent her pinwheeling off course. Ruthlessly she corrected herself, channeling that desire into action. The invisible hand of her darling's psyche found hers and she squeezed it, fingers intertwining within his own. 2 became 1. 1 mind. 1 spirit. 1 body. Most Frankxx pilots would have balked at such an unorthodox union, recoiled even. 402, it felt like coming home after a long journey and immersing herself in a hot bath. She felt her darling with her every step of the way, moving with her, guiding her, his heightened thoughts playing off her own, building and building and building into a spiraling climax until she saw stars. She felt, rather than heard herself scream. Yes. Then her consciousness shifted and turned outwards, their connection erupting into blinding light. And with that, Strelizia awoke. Zero Two felt the Frankx's limbs as keenly as if they were her own. These were her legs. Arms. This cold metal armor was her flesh, and magma her blood. The lance in hand was her weapon, an unstoppable force that could and would pierce the very heavens themselves. Yet she felt light as a feather, as if she could simply fly away with a single leap. Unbeknownst to her, her argument with Naruto had finally freed her of the last shackle holding back, tying her down. Red eyes narrowed, her expression taking on a feral, almost hungry look. Strelizia hummed. Ha, this is fantastic. Fangs flashed in the sunlight. Darling, It feels like we can fly. What's up with this crazy power all of a sudden? Though she couldn't see him, a bolt of bold laughter echoed through her ears. No idea still, this one's really aggressive, you know. That's easy. We just have to kill it harder then, don't we? Ah, her darling shook his head in faux despair. There it is, her scary side again. Dropping low to the ground, the Frankxx took on a runner's crouch. Her body radiated light as though lit from within, white, then red, followed by shades of gold. Zero Two wanted to sing. She felt alive. Invincible. Nothing in the world could touch her or her darling. Such was the heady rush she now experienced. Even after so many hardships and endless battles, she'd never experienced this kind of strength. Heightened by impatience as much as the desire to end the enemy quickly, she gave no thought as to whether or not she might be ready. Alas, newfound power often goes straight to one's head. In this, Zero Two was no exception. Let's kill it. In a single shout she ignited her boosters and raced toward the approaching Klaxosaur at full thrust. Perhaps, had she been more level-headed, she might have sensed the danger. Hey, don't just charge in without thinking. Don't stop me, darling. Sure enough, as they hurtled towards it, the towering beast did pause. Ponderously, it craned its head towards them. Zero Two scarcely noticed. Nor did she care. She felt Naruto's excitement mingle with hers and gloried in it. This would be another notch on their belts, another mindless enemy slain, and then after. Neither could have possibly prepared themselves for what came next. Turning to face them, the Klaxosaur stood its ground. Its great maw opened, gaping impossibly wide. A swell of azure light filled their vision. Shit! Throwing herself aside, Strelizia narrowly avoided the hasty blast that followed. But only just. Forced to abort their charge at the last minute, both pistol and stamen somehow raked their shared lance across the beast's hide before momentum took over. Then their velocity took over and sent them slamming hard into the ground, dragging a deep furrow into the earth. It was a rare mistake for Strelizia, one they would not make again, but still their mistake to be sure. A foolish error born of impatience, greed, and underestimating one's enemy. Had the Klaxosaur properly charged its attack, they would have been annihilated on the spot. As it stood, they'd evaded death by the thinnest margin. Bells clamored wildly in Zero Two's head as she fought to right herself, her vision tinged red by the pain. Even now she could feel Strelizia's burns as if they were her own. Their left side had been badly seared. Enough to put down most pilots perhaps, but for one such as her, the pain only made her angrier. She'd suffered far worse in her childhood. A bit of heat wasn't going to do anything more than irritate her, so she told herself. A tremor ran through her joints as she willed Strelizia to move, but the mech responded slowly. Too slowly, Morcio, her thoughts were with someone else. Darling. Banged up but still here, his voice echoed in her mind. Don't worry. The anger only strengthened her resolve. Damn it, where'd he go? No blow fell upon them. Rather than take advantage of this fresh opportunity to attack Strelizia again, however, the armored Klaxosaur had instead chosen the unthinkable, for the fearsome saurian now turned its seemingly unseeing gaze eastward. Not towards the Frankxx as one might have expected, but the nearby plantation, where so many fresh targets awaited its furious vengeance. An inexplicable keening hiss erupted out of the beast's fracture maw, and without so much as a second glance it turned tail and raced away in the opposite direction, leaving the Frankxx struggling awkwardly to its feet and asses its injuries. Naruto must have realized what it intended, because he started swearing. No turn around, don't let him get over there. Too late. In startling burst of speed, it charged headlong into the ritual area. Groaning, Strelizia surged upright and raced after the indignant Moho class as quickly as its injuries would allow. Even from here, Naruto heard the screams. With no other active Frankxx available, the Klaxosaur had free rein. With a roar, the beast rammed its wedge-shaped head against the garages housing Delphinium. Heedless of the pain, of the cannon fire pelting its hide, it pushed through. Metal yielded with a harsh squeal as the creature thrust its facade through, forcing its way inside in a frantic attempt to reach the fresh and unprotected Frankxx within. Within moments, its true goal became apparent. A swell of blinding azure light built in the back of its gaping maw, swelling into a blinding crescendo even as it wedged itself closer to its target. There was time enough for a single, panicked beat of realization as the world slowed to a crawl. In another time, Strelizia reached the beast before it could fire. In another place, nothing came of this scenario. In another world, everything ended well. But here, this time in this world, they were a single step too slow. A flash of cerulean light howled. Metal warped and twisted. Someone shrieked. Ah shit. Naruto swore. That sounded painful. Damn beast. Strelizia screamed into the Klaxosaur a heartbeat later, her searing lance opening its rightmost shoulder and ramming the larger beast aside before it could completely annihilate Delphinium's prone form. They had time enough to glimpse the scorched mech lying prone on the ground for a fleeting sliver of a second. Then they were past, ramming the bipedal beast into the earth. The poor Frankxx was obviously disabled now, and the plantation had suffered a grievous wound, but neither pilot gave that matter so much as a second thought. Perhaps they should have. Enraged as they were, neither paused to consider the consequences of their mistake. There was only the thrill of the hunt. Mounting the enraged saurian, Strelizia readied her weapon. While one hand grasped the beast's head, the other leveled their lance at the creature's exposed head. Even now it bucked and thrashed like a wild beast, desperately seeking to throw them off its back. Its struggles availed it not. For reasons unbeknownst to them, it had wasted its sole opportunity. Now, for all of its might, Strelizia's grip was iron. Its resolve, steel. Anger roared through them, paying no heed to anyone or anything else in their wild bloodlust. Magma pulsed through their spear, ready and willing to drive down into the beast's heart. Without thought, without hesitation, Strelizia stabbed down into its head. The Klaxosaur shrieked at them, its struggles intensifying tenfold. In that final instant, Naruto thought he heard a voice. A strange, feeble brush against his psyche. I don't want to die. Then the lance cut deep. Blue blood burst into the air. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Oh, that's a scary face you've got there, 09. Smash. Kiss of death. Such a tiny thing. A small seed flourishes to become a towering oak. A newborn grows up under the watchful eye of their parents. What does it mean to create such a life? What does it mean to end it? What defines that singular existence? Our emotions? The desire to seek out happiness? A mate? To procreate? I don't know. We were trying to find that answer, my darling and I. In the end, you only live once. You're born, you live, and then you die. You don't get to start over. In the end, you have to make the most of your life while you still have it. But what does it mean to truly live? Even now we're still searching for that answer as we watch over these pitiful little birds. I pity them. They know nothing of how happy they are and blindly cling to Papa's every word. The truth would destroy them, so they are left to languish in their ignorance, believing they have a purpose. If they defy that purpose, their memories are erased. Altered. And if by some miracle they actually fulfill the goal of their creation, they are taken from their cage, and a life spent in a cage is a life not lived. I wanted to create a better life with my darling. Not just for us, but for those who would come after. If it's with him, I think we can do it, have more than just a legacy. After all, what's the point in having wings if you can't use them to fly away? Scene break. Just what were you thinking? Naruto didn't flinch as Nana's sharp reprimand lashed out at him. Neither did Zero Two. Much to the supervisor's great chagrin, the unruly pair weathered her tirade with quiet stoicism and determination, never stirring in their seats, never shifting their shackles in spite of their restraints, neither batting an eyelash despite her harsh words. If anything, they seemed bored. Bored after all they'd done. They had the nerve to act as if their actions didn't have consequences. At least the boy seemed solemn enough. Not so his companion. No, now the girl was actually smiling as if she hadn't a care in the world. Did they not understand the severity of this? What's the problem? The latter yawned. We defeated that Klaxosaur, didn't we? The kids love us. Yet you allowed Ichigo to be injured. Allowed? A low growl rose in disagreement. We allowed nothing. Naruto stood slowly, his icy voice pervading the room, utterly devoid of warmth. I'll be the first to admit we screwed up, but she's alive because of us. If we hadn't diverted that monster, she'd be dead. So would Goro. I fail to see how you can lay the blame on our feet for that. Nana blanched. Goro may be fine, but her injuries are severe. Then replace the blue bitch if you like. Zero Two retorted coldly, earning a dark look from her partner in the process. Don't look at me like that, darling. Papa tried to do that with us, remember? Why shouldn't they get the same treatment? Stop it, Zero Two. We're better than this. The pinkette sniffed and turned her gaze aside. Maybe you are, but I'm not. She can rot for all I care. Now, I'm sure Nana-sana didn't mean to imply such a thing. A deceptively bright smile turned in her direction. Right, Nana-san? Now it was Nana's turn to flinch. While it remained true she hadn't been privy to that disaster at its inception, she knew the bitterness behind her green-eyed gaze all too well. Naruto aside, Zero Two was spoiling for a fight. This wasn't good. She needed to rein things in before they got out of hand, but at the same time, risked alienating them. Try as she might, she couldn't find a way to do so, not when she found herself operating on so little information. Why had the doctor sent them here in the first place? Why were they charged with overseeing Squad 13's growth? Was Papa aware of this? No, he must have, otherwise he wouldn't have sent the Nines over so quickly after the ceremony. If things continued as they were, you will do as you're told and you will follow orders. Or what, Nana-san? Now the blonde raised his voice in challenge against her, a rare look of anger flitting across his visage. You'll send the Nines after us? Erase our memories? Try to beat us back into submission? Make us tools again? Oh, he purred, and as she looked on, those wildly mismatching eyes seemed to gleam with rare excitement at the prospect. Please try. Give us an excuse. We'll be more than happy to drag 9 Alpha through the muck again. Delta and Epsilon too. Be sure and ask them about that the next time you see them. I'm sure they'd love to tell you all about it, how we thrashed the 8 of them. Wait. He paused suddenly in mid-speak, eyeing her with amused disbelief. Tilting his head, he inhaled deeply, scenting the air. Papa actually sent them to make sure we didn't step out line again, didn't he? When she didn't refute him, a small smile danced across his whiskered visage. This is rich, they're waiting for us outside. A soft sigh trailed out of Zero Two. If Blondie's here, I swear I'll kill him this time. Was that a note of eagerness in her voice just now? I can neither confirm nor deny. Right, great. Mind holding this for me? In a single fluid movement he rose, snapping his shackles and kicking the chair out beneath him into his hand. A flick of the wrist lobbed it at the startled redhead, forcing her to dodge or risk being flattened by the flying projectile. From there he easily reached over and freed his partner, taking hold of the manacles meant to bind her wrists, only to shatter them like so much driftwood. Humming in contentment, the horned Oni bounced to her feet and kicked away the chains binding her legs. Well, I believe that concludes our interview for today. Turning to face Nana, the blonde sketched a low bow. We'll have to go do this again sometime. Up we go, 02-inch. Grinning, the whiskered warrior pivoted on one heel and swept the pinkette's legs. Scooping her up into her arms, he laid one hand against her back. The other took up residence beneath her knees, holding her aloft like little more than a child, carrying her with poise and grace she knew all too well. Rather than give her time to escape, her mate simply turned and made for the exit. Hey, wait, darling. Sputtering, the Oni flailed in his grasp, wrapping her arms around his neck for purchase lest she fall while he walked. A Princess Carrie? Really? This is embarrassing. What can I say? Her beloved hummed. I'm feeling romantic today. Where are you two going? Nana shouted. We're not Finn. You're starting to make me angry, Nana. A lone ruby eye loomed over Naruto's shoulder, stunned their warden into silence. That brilliant slitted iris regarded her with quiet contempt. No, far less than that, she realized. Pity. As if its owner knew something she didn't, as though she were an ant unworthy even of being squashed. His gaze never wavered from hers, and despite his companion cradled in his arms, the redhead felt icy fingers of dread trail down her spine. This wasn't the gaze of a mere man, a creature of flesh and bone. She was looking at a beast, one who would happily swallow her whole if she provoked it. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. She bristled. Don't you dare. Lalala can't hear you say hi to Hachi for us when you get out. Wait, what? The blonde's boot shot out with sound and aplomb, the steel-shot edge catching the rim of the door and slamming forward ahead of him. Satisfied with his impromptu exit, the blonde stepped over the sundered frame and with one last jaunty wave from Zero Two, they were gone. Before she could think to rise and chase after them, a second kick sent the twisted metal shrieking back into the room from whence it came, effectively barring both her passage and any attempt at escape. Only a fleeting glimmer of luck prevented her from being disemboweled on the spot. In vain she struggled to move the door, to no avail. Naruto and Zero Two paid her shouts little heed. You're enjoying yourself? He merely whistled. You're not going to put me down, are you? Glancing down at his companion, the whiskered youth flashed Zero Two a thin smile. Of course I am eventually. This is really embarrassing, you know. His smile only deepened as they walked. I know. A beat of calm silence passed between them, broken only by the muted sound of Naruto's footsteps drumming upon the hardened metal floor. Content to be carried for the time being, the hybrid contented herself to snuggle against her partner and lay her head into his chest. His heartbeat thrummed in her ears, strong and steady without a hint of fear. Her fingers tightened against the flexible fabric of his flight suit, seeking purchase on the strong material and the corded muscle beneath. She must have tickled him, because a low laugh rumbled in her ears. Hey, darling. Naruto glanced at her askance. The way Nana looked at me, a monster? Don't talk like that, idiot. If you're a monster then that makes me one too. Strong arms tightened their hold on her body and raised her up just so, firm yet surprisingly gentle. In the next instant Zero Two felt something sharp press against her horns, messy hair tickling at her nose. In her confusion it took her a moment to realize what the blonde was doing, that he just deliberately pressed the nubs of his still-growing spikes against hers. A slow flush rose to her pale cheeks as he pulled away, accompanied by the tiniest of smiles. Her body found itself warmed by the quiet intimacy of this humble gesture, that quiet flicker of fear doused by the smile on his face. Let's run away. Heh, that's my line, his smile never wavered. Where do you want to go? The intensity of his response nearly startled Zero Two, rather, because she knew he'd spoken with absolute certainty. They'd long plotted such an escape, and to speak of it aloud in the middle of a plantation felt almost treasonous somehow. It wasn't that they lacked the power to do so in the first place, considering they possessed a near unlimited power supply in the form of her darling, rather, a lack of direction stayed their hand. Where could they go? Where would they go? Were there outposts in the wastes? A band of humans tucked away from the world, just waiting to be discovered? She wanted to believe that there might be others out there, a place where they could make a home. But first and foremost, I want to see the sea. I'm fine with that, he replied. Then I want to dance in the water. Again, no problems with that one either. But Zero Two wasn't finished, no, far from it. After that, grinning, she shifted in his arms until she caught his eye. One hand reached up, fingers curling around the whiskered line of his jaw. Doubtless he expected another ridiculous request of some sort. She knew her darling as she knew no other, just as she knew he was slow to anger, difficult to surprise, and sometimes had the attention span of a bird. He was flighty, foolish, and wild. Moreover, he was hers and she was his. Thus, Zero Two admittedly took wicked pleasure in surprising him with her response. I want to make lots and lots of babies with you. Naruto nearly tripped and crashed headlong into the deck. What? Can you even? If it's with you, I'm sure we can. The youth managed eloquently. All right, he relented. But I want to help those kids first. Why bother? Zero Two snorted derisively. They're going to die regardless, with or without our help. Why? Mismatching orbs narrowed on her. Because we must be better than this. Naruto argued, giving her a light shake as they rounded an elevator. If we leave them to die, we're no better than Papa and his thugs. Pausing to take in the cityscape beyond, he keyed in a numerical sequence. After a moment's hesitation, the door closed behind them, sending the pair rushing up into golden darkness. Those little birds might die if we help them, but they'll definitely get themselves killed if we leave them alone. They're different. Can't you tell? I can't just leave them alone, you know? They need us. The hybrid turned aside, pouting in the dark. You're such an oddball, darling. Don't I know it? Now, what do you say we head back to that birdcage, find ourselves a room, and… Alas, it was not to be. The elevator doors opened with a rush of air, but rather than the empty space they'd expected, they found their minder awaiting them in the hallway beyond. Thankfully, he'd come alone. Not wishing to be held in such a vulnerable position in the face of the enemy, Zero Two wriggled free from her darling's grasp and stood. Naruto spared her little more than a passing glance, and she soon saw why. His once pleasant expression had twisted into an expression that could only be called quietly murderous. As they looked on, he pushed himself off the wall and raised a hand in greeting. Yo, he waved. You're perky as ever, I see. A muscle jumped in Zero Two's jaw. 9 Alpha. She despised every fiber of his being, from his pale blonde hair to those hideous green eyes. As ever he stood clad in white, wearing that same smug smile. Always so confident, so insufferable, as though he stood above everyone else, and all the rest were little more than dirt beneath his boots. His arrogance might have bothered her more had she not seen that favored facade shatter once before, watched those ugly orbs widen with fear as she'd squeezed his throat. For all his bluster, he was no match for the two of them combined, and he knew it. For all his dutiful diffidence, he wasn't invincible. If anything, he was quite weak when forced to fight alone. Yet he was still smiling. What had changed since then? Something to think about certainly, but at the moment more pressing concerns reared their heads. She growled, biting her thumb to stifle a snarl. Why the hell are you here? Did Papa send you? Oh, I'm not here to bring you back, the green-eyed youth reassured them. Just to observe. Naruto snorted. Then observe us walking away. 3 swift steps carried 09 forward to meet Alpha, and for a fleeting sliver of a second, 02 wondered if her darling would actually attack him. It certainly seemed so. His once amicable smile was nowhere to be seen, replaced now by a look of cold indifference. Instead, he simply shouldered the smaller boy aside, thrusting him aside without so much as a single grunt. Metal shrieked in protest as the boy's back crunched against it, doubling him over and dropping him to his knees. Not willing to risk further aggression, Naruto took her by the hand and surged forward, past the battered boy. 02 went gladly, pausing just long enough to shoot their tormentor one last icy glare over her shoulder. At least, the attempt was made. Scary as ever, Oda. She paused. 02. My name is 02, she ground the words out between clenched teeth. That's the name my darling gave me. I prefer it. Are you throwing away the name Papa gave you? Her eyes began to burn. Oh, that's a terrifying look. She's going to devour you someday, 09. You know that, don't you? Exasperated, Naruto exhaled in a sharp breath of anger. Oh, that's a scary face you've got there, 09. Smash. Pivoting on one heel, he stepped in and decked him across the face with his right fist, simultaneously seizing a fistful of the young man's shirt in hand to haul him upright. A bestial roar tore out of him and slammed down into his captive's face, momentarily deafening him like the war cry of a great demon. 9 Alpha made no attempt to defend himself. He only smiled into the face of the beast. Perhaps he'd been trying to provoke him all along. As she looked on, the older boy's arms swung back to strike. Firm fingers ground into fists, clenching with anger. Falling. No, shaking his head as much as himself, Naruto released the hybrid. You're not worth it. Let's go, 02. But he started. I said no, an outraged iris flashed out over his shoulder. We're leaving. They made it all of 9 steps before he called out to them again. Just how long are the two you going to play human? Something snapped in her. Naruto saw it coming. 02 no. P02 is. Did I make you angry? Shut up. Quick as a thought, 02 rounded on 9 Alpha, fangs bared. Even as the boy realized his mistake, she flew at him. Pounced. Strong arms seized him by the head and drove him to the floor. Someone was screaming. A low, dull roar in her ears. She wasn't sure who. Didn't care. Through eyes stained red by anger, she saw nothing. There was only her anger, only they prey beneath her, those ugly green eyes gazing up at her in mocking, searing, silent scorn. Something, or was it someone, tried to pull her away, pry her off, and she slapped them aside with a wordless howl. Alpha tried to rise and she bashed his head in, her fists descending ruthlessly against his skull with a harsh crack. You don't say that about my darling. With every word she struck, beating him. Twice. Thrice. Beneath her, Alpha tried to rise, and so she struck him again. And again. The rhythmic slap of clenched knuckles meeting flesh filled his ears. Still, Zero Two didn't cease. She cared not for the red that flew in her face. Years of pent-up anger roared forth, determined to have their say. Their day. Always holding back. Always restraining herself. Never lashing out. No more. If anything, the Nine's struggles only emboldened the enraged Oni. It made her laugh. Where was that smug smile now? Where had that arrogance gone in such a hurry? She never wanted to see them him of her again, never again. His arms rose in a vain attempt to ward off her attacks. She cut through them, stabbed into his chest. A bloody gurgle reached her ears, but by now she scarcely heard him. Her hand shot down at his throat, fingers clenched in a knife. Euphoria. We'll have to get out of bed sooner or later, you know? Nope. Don't wanna. Not gonna let go, darling. I don't have any say in this, do I? Nope. Tease is troublesome. What was that? Nothing. Mine interlude. Zero Two hummed like a contented kitten to herself as she buried her head in a pillow and tugged the blanket closer to her bare body. She never wanted to leave this bed. Ever. Ensconced in the silken cocoon she'd built for herself overnight, she was quite determined to laze away the rest of the day in warm, contented bliss. Dappled sunlight spilled through the window, not bright enough to wake her, yet just enough to warm her exposed visage all the same. Thick blankets rustled against bare skin through her nightgown as she quietly curled inward on herself. Fingers of fine cotton feebly plucked at her senses to lull her back to sleep. She was half tempted to let them and would have, if not for one tiny problem. Stop hogging all the blankets, will you? A sleepy groan rumbled through her ears. I'm cold. An impish grin stole across the Oni's face, green eyes creasing in a smile. Too bad. With an exultant laugh, the pinkette tugged the blankets tighter about herself and burrowed deep. Someone yanked them back and Zero Two yelped, quite suddenly finding herself deprived of the precious warmth that had been so ready to lull her back to sleep a moment ago. Shivering in the pale morning light, she tried to haul them back, to no avail. Her companion's grip was ironclad and she gained naught but an inch. A small, petulant whine built in the back of her throat. No fair, no. His low, sonorous snore answered, turning her gaze to jade slits. No, you do not get to go back to sleep after that. In a single fluid movement, the hybrid vaulted onto his back and slammed a feather pillow onto her lover's head. Naruto didn't even twitch. Damn. She forgot he could sleep like the dead when he wanted to. Well, she had other ways of rousing him now, didn't she? And if it caused him a bit of discomfort, too bad. Come on now, wake up. Impossibly, he snored all the louder. Zero Two rolled her eyes and climbed higher, lowering her lips to his exposed ear. Still he didn't stir. She even tried blowing into it, but the blonde only swatted at her ineffectually. Not good enough. With the hints of an amused smile, she bent low, opened her mouth, and... Borg? Naruto jerked upright, arms flailing as if he'd been doused with scalding water. Mission accomplished. Even as he flailed about like a berserk Klaxosaur, Zero Two slithered under his guard to tackle him back to the bed. For his part, the blonde didn't resist. Perhaps he recognized her scent. Perhaps he'd simply woken quickly. Regardless, his arms tightened around her waist, and she found herself trapped beneath him, blankets and Alan relative short order. Of course he'd reacted so cuckly, he was hers after all. She expected no less of her mate. No one else was allowed to touch him. No one else could ever look at him. No one else would have him. Maybe she had a problem. She considered that for a moment as she nuzzled into his back. Screw the Nines. It had felt good to beat that little bastard's face in, no matter what chaos might come of it. Alpha wouldn't trouble them anymore, and the rest of his little squad would likely be too terrified to intervene again. Still, security had proven remarkably lax the last few days. If they were going to be apprehended for it, NarutoxZero Two thought it quite likely they would best thought Papa or AP would have acted by now. Yet they had done nothing of the sort. How very unlike those rotten cowards. What was holding them back? Were they afraid? She hoped they were. Not that she objected, mind you. She was far too focused on other matters. Hey, darling. With a yawn, the object of her affections turned over to face her. What are you waking me up for so early, oi? Mismatching eyes regarded her blearily. No reason, she hummed, giving his shoulder a playful/teasing nibble. Just missed you. Those bleary blue eyes gazed at her for another long moment, blinking slowly as sense struggled to reassert itself. All told, she wasn't wholly prepared when he reached out and pulled her close. Warm lips alighted against her forehead and she purred, curling close to him. Even through the blankets his body was like a small furnace, a gentle oven wrapping her in layers of warmth. She was just about to drift off again when she felt his lips brush the outer lobe of her ear. You know, I've decided something, he hummed almost to himself. Let's get married? Zero Two sucked in a sharp breath through her teeth. What did you just? In her quiet frenzy the words had tumbled out of her before Zero Two could have thought to hold them back, and she felt him stiffen against her body. Her cheeks burned and she seized him in a strong embrace, slammed her flushing face headlong into her beloved's chest with enough force to cut him with tips of her horns. She expected shock. Disbelief at the least. Truth be told, Zero Two barely even knew what marriage was thanks to that book, but she knew it enough to know that she wanted it. Fiercely. Desperately. The slow, sleepy smile he gave her was anything but, and a traitorous whimper stole out of her despite her very best intentions. For all her fierce pride and the front she'd put up, she hadn't expected him to actually ask that. Not so readily at least. Naruto was always the curious one, always asking questions, always careful not to rush headlong into a fight they weren't prepared for. That he'd suddenly said yes to something she'd been hoping for on years now sent a sudden pang of self-consciousness stabbing. Of joy, but also relief. Chewing at her lip, the Oni leaned forward, butting his head with her horns. She could almost see his now faint crimson tips peeking out toward the back of his head. Are you sure? He blinked at her. What kind of question is that? I'm messed up, you know. For all her joy and fear she clenched his right hand tightly, fingers white-knuckled around his own. I'm stupid and selfish and jealous and loudend and messy. In the face of his serene calm she flailed at an excuse. Why would you ever want someone like me? I keep causing trouble for you. He kissed her fiercely, distracting her most pleasantly with his ministrations. You need to stop doing that, there's nothing wrong with you. But when she opened her mouth to protest further, he smothered any and all objections with his lips again. Gentle fingers threaded through the smooth curtain of her hair, gently cradling her head as she sought a better angle against him. Another protest fell still on her tongue, replaced by a soft, mewling moan as his own danced with hers. Whenever she tried to protest he was there to smooth away her fears. Just so you know, she hissed, I'm stubborn. And I never give up. Naruto kissed her again. That's what I love most about you. Her heart fluttered and that was the end of it. With that something stirred in Zero Two and she growled furiously, reluctance and fear giving way to desire. She locked her legs around his waist to hold herself steady against him, to hold him to her as much as she did him. He wanted to be that way, did he? So be it. They were both broken in their own way, she with her wild fits of passion, and he with the looming gaps in his past. She cared about him, and he about her, and that would just have to be enough. Whatever mountains rose in their path, whatever enemies barred their way, they'd face them together. I've decided, she declared, nuzzling her cheek against his. We're never going to leave this bed. Naruto arched an eyebrow. We'll have to get out of bed sooner or later, you know? Nope, she sang. Don't wanna. Not gonna let go, darling. I don't have any say in this, do I? Nope, nope. Tease is troublesome. What was that? Nothing. I will drown you in crimson. Two monsters.